The heavy bass from the frat house next door was vibrating through the thin floorboards of the Eastwood University dorms, but the only rhythm I could focus on was the agonizing, rhythmic stabbing in my lower abdomen. It felt like my insides were being twisted through a rusty meat grinder. I was curled up on the cold bathroom tiles, biting down so hard on a rolled-up towel that my jaw ached desperately trying to swallow my own pathetic whimpers. I am a guy. At least that is what my driver's license says, what my oversized hoodies say, and what everyone on campus firmly believes. But biology decided to play a sick, twisted joke on me. I am intersex. Underneath my carefully constructed, unapproachable exterior lies a body that betrays me every single month with a painful, humiliating period. I dragged my trembling body up to the sink, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the porcelain edge. I turned the faucet on full blast, letting the freezing water run over my hands as I fiercely scrubbed at the dark red stain on my underwear. As the soapy pinkish water swirled down the drain, I felt my dignity circling right down with it. It was exhausting. Faking long-distance girlfriend calls to buy sanitary pads, hiding in stalls, dodging communal showers. It was a full-time job built on a foundation of pure terror. If anyone found out the pity, the disgust, the inevitable isolation, it would break me. To distract myself from the physical agony and the crushing weight of my reality, I mentally replayed the last scene I had written in my notebook. It was a dark, twisted little fanfic. A completely fictional, utterly self-indulgent world where I wasn't a freak hiding in a bathroom. A story where I was pressed against a wall by the most perfect, untouchable guy on campus. My roommate Asher. Asher was everything I wasn't. He was Eastwood's undisputed golden boy, a brilliant pre-law student with a staggering trust fund, a face that looked like it was carved out of cold marble, and an aloof, intimidating demeanor that somehow only made people flock to him more. We were polar opposites. To compensate for my defective body and the agonizing inferiority complex it bred, I fought him tooth and nail. I treated him as an enemy, fighting fiercely for the top GPA, glaring at him across lecture halls, and shooting down his rare attempts at conversation. I was a ruthless overachiever by day. But by night, when the dorm was dead silent, I poured every ounce of my repressed, pathetic infatuation into a little black notebook. I wrote him as obsessed, as dominant, as entirely consumed by me. I wrote scenarios where he discovered my secret body and worshipped it instead of rejecting it. It was a pathetic, dangerous coping mechanism, but it was the only lifeline I had. Yo, Elliot, you in there, man? The sudden loud banging on the bathroom door made my heart completely stop. It was Blake, our third roommate. He wasn't supposed to be back from the Delta Kappa kegger until at least 3 in the morning. Just a minute, I choked out, forcing my naturally husky voice to sound annoyed rather than terrified. Panic surged through my veins like a shot of ice water. I scrambled to hide the soiled clothes in a plastic grocery bag, shoving them frantically to the very bottom of my laundry basket. I grabbed my bathrobe, throwing it awkwardly over my shoulders, and blindly reached for my toothbrush on the sink counter to complete the illusion. In my frantic, panicked rush, my elbow clipped the edge of my toiletry bag. My little black notebook, the one I had foolishly brought into the bathroom to jot down an idea during the cramps, slid off the slick porcelain. It hit the floor with a loud hollow noise. Before I could even bend down to retrieve it, the bathroom door handle twisted. I hadn't locked it properly in my pain-addled haze. The door swung inward. Blake stood there, reeking of cheap beer and cheap cologne, his glazed eyes darting from my pale, sweating face to the laundry basket and finally down to the floor. "Don't move." The voice didn't come from Blake. It came from the dimly lit hallway behind him. It was deep, impossibly calm, and carried an undeniable heavy authority. Asher. Asher stepped into the doorway, his tall, broad-shouldered frame instantly making the small bathroom feel suffocatingly tight. He casually but firmly grabbed Blake by the back of his collar and pulled him out of the room. He said he needed a minute, Blake. Back off. While Blake stumbled backward into the dorm room, mumbling a confused and slurred apology, Asher stepped past him. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead. I was paralyzed by a fear so intense it made my ears ring with high-pitched static. Asher crouched down, his long, elegant fingers closed around the black leather cover of my notebook. It had landed splayed wide open to the exact page I had been writing on earlier, the scene where Asher pinned my wrists above my head, his mouth trailing down my neck, telling me how beautiful my differences were. Time slowed down to an agonizing crawl. I watched, completely helpless, as Asher didn't just pick it up and hand it back. His dark eyes flicked downward, his gaze locked onto the ink. He read it. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. I saw his pupils contract sharply, a single tense muscle feathered in his sharp jawline. He slowly closed the notebook, the sharp sound of the paper echoing like a gunshot in the tense silence. He stood up to his full height, completely ignoring Blake's drunken rambling in the background. Asher held the notebook out to me. His expression was a flawless, terrifyingly icy mask. Not a single trace of emotion gave away what he was thinking. But his eyes were dark, heavy, and burning with a terrifying intensity that pinned me to the spot. "You dropped this, Elliot," he said. His voice dropped an octave, slipping over my name in a slow, deliberate drawl that sent a violent shiver down my spine. I took the notebook with trembling, clammy hands, feeling the lingering warmth of his fingers on the leather cover. As I clutched it to my chest, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had just signed my own death warrant. He knew. The silence in room 412 was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a living, breathing entity. It was a physical weight pressing down on my chest until my ribs ached. It had been exactly 3 days since the incident in the bathroom. 3 days since the heavy, suffocating moment. Asher's dark eyes had scanned the most degrading, desperate corners of my mind. I had spent the last 72 hours waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. I waited for the mocking laughter, the disgusted sneers, or the inevitable moment he would toss my notebook onto the center of the room and out me to Blake and the rest of the dorm. But he did nothing. He didn't blackmail me. He didn't look at me with disgust. In fact, he barely looked at me at all, and somehow that absolute calculated indifference was infinitely worse. It felt like being trapped in a cage with a sleeping tiger, entirely unsure of when it would wake up and decide it was hungry. To survive, my defense mechanisms kicked into dangerous overdrive. If he thought he had me completely figured out, if he thought I was the pathetic, submissive mess I had written about in those pages, I was going to prove him dead wrong. I threw myself into hostility. I became a walking, talking porcupine, bristling whenever he was in the same room. The perfect battleground presented itself on Wednesday afternoon. We were forcefully paired up for our midterm project in advanced constitutional law. Usually, I would silently do my half of the work, let him do his, and we would seamlessly staple our brilliance together for a guaranteed A grade. Not this time. We were sitting across from each other at the small, scratched wooden table in the corner of our dorm. Blake was at the library, leaving us entirely alone in the suffocating tension. I aggressively dragged my red pen across Asher's printed outline, crossing out entire paragraphs with vicious, jagged lines. "Your interpretation of the 14th Amendment is entirely flawed." I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. I kept my eyes glued to the paper, terrified that if I looked up and met his gaze, my facade would crumble. "You are relying on outdated precedents. The professor will tear this argument apart in 3 seconds. I am rewriting the entire second section." I waited for the pushback. Asher was a perfectionist, an academic machine who never let anyone touch his work. I wanted him to argue. I wanted him to yell. I wanted any normal hostile reaction to prove that the power dynamic hadn't fundamentally shifted. Instead, there was only the soft rustle of paper. I finally dared to glance up. Asher wasn't looking at the essay. He was looking at me. His posture was relaxed, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed over his chest, but his eyes were sharp, analytical, and entirely too observant. He was looking at my pale skin, the dark circles under my eyes, and the slight tremor in my fingers that I couldn't completely suppress. The cramps were still sending dull, throbbing waves of pain through my abdomen, and the sheer terror of the past few days had left me completely drained. Without saying a single word, Asher stood up. He walked over to his immaculate side of the room, opened his mini fridge, and took out a thermos. He poured a steaming, dark amber liquid into a mug and walked back over. He slid the mug across the table until it touched the edge of my notebook. The sharp, spicy scent of fresh ginger and brown sugar hit my nose. It was exactly what I usually sneaked into the kitchen to make when my period pain became unbearable. "I don't want it," I said immediately, my defensive walls shooting up 100 feet high. "I drink coffee." Asher didn't move it back. Instead, he reached over to his bed, picked up his thick, heavy varsity jacket, and tossed it carelessly over my shoulders. The sudden weight and warmth of it enveloped me, smelling intensely of cedarwood and his clean, sharp cologne. My breath hitched. "Drink it," Asher set his voice a low, commanding rumble that left absolutely no room for debate. He sat back down and pulled the ruined essay toward him. "And keep the jacket on. You are shivering so hard it is shaking the table. Don't let your pathetic pale face drag down my presentation grade, Elliot. I refuse to get anything less than a perfect score just because you don't know how to take care of yourself." I stared at him, my mind spinning in a chaotic whirlwind. His words were harsh, biting, and entirely arrogant, but the ginger tea was exactly the right temperature, perfectly sweetened, and the jacket was trapping my body heat, slowly easing the agonizing knots in my stomach. The contradiction between his cruel tone and his meticulously gentle actions was enough to drive me insane. I gripped the mug with both hands, hiding the fact that they were shaking, and took a slow sip. I felt like I was losing my mind. That night, the insomnia hit me harder than ever. At 2 a.m., the dorm was pitch black, save for the orange glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. The rhythmic, heavy snoring from Blake's bed was the only sound. I needed an outlet. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of Asher's silent, intense gaze and his confusing, forceful care. I needed to regain control, even if it was only in a fictional world. With trembling hands, I reached under my mattress and pulled out the small black notebook. I turned on the tiny dim reading light clipped to my headboard. I just needed to write him as a villain. I needed to write a scene where I fought back, where I wasn't paralyzed by the mere scent of his cologne. I flipped through the pages, searching for the last blank space I had left. I found the page, but it wasn't blank. My heart stopped completely. All the blood drained from my face, leaving me dizzy and nauseous. Right below my last paragraph, a heavily detailed, deeply embarrassing fantasy where I had described Asher pinning me to the floor of the locker room, there was a new block of text. It wasn't my messy, rushed handwriting. It was sharp, elegant, and entirely precise cursive written in bright red ink. I stopped breathing as I read the words. "This position is logically flawed, Elliot. The anatomical structure you have described is completely incorrect. If I were to pin your wrists at that specific angle while pressing my knee between your thighs, you would dislocate your hip joint within seconds." My eyes widened in sheer unadulterated horror. I gripped the edges of the book so tightly the paper threatened to tear. Furthermore, the red ink continued smoothly. "If I wanted to render you completely immobile, I wouldn't waste time holding your wrists. My hands would be much lower, like this. Try to write it more accurately next time." Below the text was a quick, flawlessly sketched anatomical diagram showing exactly where his hands should be placed on my waist to maximize leverage. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. The notebook slipped from my numb fingers, dropping softly onto my blankets. He hadn't just read it. He had taken it. Sometime during the day, while I was in the shower or down the hall, he had carefully pulled it from its hiding spot, read my most intimate, degrading fantasies, and actually graded them. He was correcting my fantasies about him. A violent shiver tore through my body. I slowly, terrifyingly lifted my head and looked across the narrow gap between our beds. The curtain around Asher's bed was pulled back just an inch. In the dim, shadowy darkness of the room, I could see the faint glint of his eyes. He wasn't asleep. He was lying there, perfectly still, watching me. He was watching me read his notes. The line between being bullied and being completely terrifyingly possessed had just vanished. I realized with a sickening, thrilling jolt to my stomach that I wasn't just hiding a secret anymore. I was a pawn on a chessboard, and Asher was a predator who had finally decided to start playing with his food. Thanksgiving break hit the Eastwood University campus like a ghost town. By Wednesday evening, the halls were entirely devoid of life, echoing only with the hum of the vending machines and the biting autumn wind rattling the window panes. Blake had caught a flight to Florida to get drunk on a beach, and I had fabricated an elaborate story about taking a bus to New York to spend the holiday with my non-existent girlfriend. In reality, I had stockpiled painkillers and locked myself inside room 412. My cycle was 3 days late, and my body was punishing me for it with a vengeance I had never experienced before. By Thursday afternoon, the pain had morphed from a dull rhythmic ache into blinding, stabbing agony. A high fever had set in, wrapping my brain in a thick, delirious fog. Every time I tried to stand, the room spun violently. I was sweating through my clothes, trembling uncontrollably under 3 layers of blankets. Around 4 p.m., a sudden sickening rush forced me out of bed. I stumbled blindly toward the ensuite bathroom, my legs feeling like wet sand. I barely made it to the tiles before my knees buckled entirely. I collapsed onto the cold, hard floor, dragging myself toward the shower stall. I managed to strip off my sweat-soaked, blood-stained clothes, my breath coming out in ragged, pathetic gasps. I turned the shower on, letting the lukewarm water hit my shivering back, watching the dark red water swirl toward the drain, the metallic smell of blood mixed with the steam making my stomach churn violently. I needed to wash the clothes. I needed to hide the evidence. But as I reached for the stained fabric, a sharp, white-hot spike of pain tore through my abdomen. I choked on a sob, curling into a tight fetal position on the wet shower floor. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. The rushing sound of the water grew distant, muffled by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I couldn't breathe. The darkness swallowed me whole, and my head hit the tiles with a dull noise. I didn't know how much time had passed when I felt the wood of the bathroom door splinter. It was a loud, violent sound that barely penetrated my unconscious state. Through a haze of fever and pain, I felt strong, warm hands grabbing my shoulders. The water was abruptly shut off. Elliot. The voice was rough, frantic, a stark contrast to its usual icy calm. Asher. A fresh wave of absolute terror pierced through my delirium. No, he wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be at a sprawling estate in the Hamptons. He couldn't see this. He couldn't see me. I tried to push him away weakly, batting at his arms, but I was completely devoid of strength. I was entirely exposed, my twisted, defective biology laid bare under the harsh, fluorescent lights. The blood, the scars, the undeniable truth of what I was. Don't look, I rasped my voice, breaking into a pathetic whimper. Tears of pure humiliation spilled over my eyelashes. Please don't look at me. Stop moving. You are burning up, Asher commanded. His voice was breathless but terrifyingly steady. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pull away in disgust. Instead, he grabbed a large dry towel and wrapped it tightly around my trembling naked body, completely enveloping me in warmth. He scooped me up into his arms effortlessly, pressing my face into the crook of his neck. The familiar sharp scent of cedarwood washed over me, grounding me in the chaotic whirlwind of my panic. I was too weak to fight the darkness anymore, and I slipped back into unconsciousness. When I finally opened my eyes again, the dorm room was pitch black, save for the soft glow of the desk lamp. I was lying on a bed, but the sheets smelled like expensive laundry detergent and cedar. Asher's bed. I shifted slightly, realizing I was dressed in a pair of clean, oversized sweatpants and a soft t-shirt. The crushing weight of reality slammed into my chest. He had seen everything. He had cleaned me. He had dressed me. My deepest, darkest, most humiliating secret was entirely out in the open. I squeezed my eyes shut, wanting the ground to open up and swallow me whole. I braced myself for the disgust. I braced myself for the mocking laughter. The mattress dipped. Asher sat on the edge of the bed. I turned my head away, unable to look at him, staring blankly at the wall. You had a fever of 103, Asher said quietly. His voice was low, lacking any of the hostility from the past few days. I gave you Tylenol an hour ago. The fever broke. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. Why didn't you go home? Because I knew you weren't going anywhere, he replied simply. He reached out his cool fingers, gently brushing my damp bangs away from my sweaty forehead. I flinched, my whole body tensing defensively. Elliot, look at me. I didn't move. Asher sighed softly. He reached down and picked up a small tube of medical ointment from the nightstand. Your inner thighs are severely chafed, he said, his tone entirely clinical, but laced with a heavy, undeniable gentleness. The skin is raw. You need to apply this, or it is going to get infected. My breath caught in my throat. He was talking about the bruises and the chafing from my frantic, aggressive scrubbing in the shower over the past few days. When I still didn't move, Asher slowly pulled the blanket down to my knees. I gasped, my hands flying down to stop him, but he caught my wrists with one hand, pinning them gently but firmly against the mattress. Don't, I begged, my voice trembling violently. I am not going to hurt you, Asher whispered. He squeezed a small amount of the cool gel onto his fingertips. Carefully, meticulously, he applied it to the raw red skin on my thighs. His touch was incredibly light, almost reverent, as if I were made of fragile glass. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The scene playing out in front of me was terrifyingly familiar. He applied the medicine to my bruised skin, his touch cool and gentle, entirely unfazed by my broken body. I had written those exact words in my black notebook 3 months ago. He was bringing my pathetic fantasy to life. I finally turned my head to look at him. His dark eyes were focused intently on his task. There was no disgust in his gaze, no pity. No mockery, only a deep, heavy concentration that made my stomach flip in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with fear. "Does it hurt?" he asked softly, his thumb gently smoothing over a dark bruise. "No," I choked out. He looked up, meeting my eyes. In the dim light, the walls of his aloof, untouchable facade seemed to have vanished entirely. He looked at me with an intensity that made me feel entirely bare, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel entirely monstrous. I realized with a sinking, terrifying clarity that the wall I had built between us was cracking. I wasn't just afraid of him exposing my secret anymore. I was terrified of how much I wanted to lean into his touch. The predator wasn't just playing with his food, he was nursing it back to health, and I was hopelessly, dangerously falling for him. The days following Thanksgiving break were a masterclass in psychological torture. The suffocating tension in room 412 hadn't dissipated, it had mutated. The cold, impenetrable wall I had built between Asher and me was completely gone, replaced by a fragile, terrifyingly intimate dynamic that left me entirely on edge. He had seen my ruined body. He had touched the scars and the bruised, raw skin. Yet instead of exposing me, he had kept my secret locked away behind his sharp, dark eyes. He didn't treat me like a fragile glass doll, but his gaze followed me everywhere, heavy, calculating, and laced with an unspoken possessiveness that made my pulse race constantly. I was losing my mind. The line between my pathetic secret fantasies and my waking reality was blurring so fast I couldn't tell which way was up. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for him to either pull me back or push me over entirely. The breaking point arrived on a freezing Tuesday evening. I was sitting alone at a secluded table in the campus coffee shop, aggressively highlighting a textbook to keep my mind off the dull ache still lingering in my lower abdomen. The shop was crowded, the air thick with the smell of roasted espresso and damp winter coats. Well, if it isn't Eastwood's resident ghost. I stiffened. A large, heavy hand suddenly clamped down on my shoulder, the fingers squeezing just a little too tight. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Tyler. He was a senior, the golden boy of the Delta Kappa frat house, and lately, for some inexplicable, horrifying reason, he had taken a sudden interest in me. "Hey, Tyler," I muttered instinctively, shrinking away from his touch. Tyler didn't take the hint. He slid into the empty chair beside me, invading my personal space entirely. He smelled like cheap beer, peppermint gum, and overwhelming arrogance. "You are always hiding in a corner, Elliot. It is a tragedy, really. Someone with a face as pretty as yours shouldn't be buried in a constitutional law textbook on a Tuesday night." My stomach churned. The word pretty scraped against my nerves like sandpaper. He reached out his fingers, brushing against the collar of my oversized hoodie, intentionally grazing the sensitive skin of my neck. "We are throwing a massive party at the house this Friday. You should come. I will personally make sure you have a good time." Panic flared in my chest. Being in a crowded, sweaty frat house where drunk guys grabbed at you was my literal worst nightmare. If anyone touched me the wrong way, if they felt the slight feminine curve of my waist that I tried so desperately to hide under layers of fabric, I would be entirely destroyed. "I can't, I am busy," I said quickly, my voice trembling slightly as I shoved my textbook into my bag. "Come on, don't be like that." Tyler leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, persuasive murmur. His hand slid from my shoulder, resting heavily against my lower back. A violent shudder tore through me. "Don't touch me." I gasped, trying to stand up, but I was boxed in between the table and his large frame. Before Tyler could say another word, the temperature in the coffee shop seemed to plummet to absolute zero. A large pale hand clamped around Tyler's wrist. The grip was so sudden and so visibly crushing that Tyler actually let out a sharp intake of breath due to pain. I looked up. Asher was standing there. He looked like an avenging angel carved from ice. He was wearing his heavy dark coat, his jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle feathered dangerously in his cheek. His dark eyes weren't looking at me. They were locked onto Tyler with a terrifying, predatory stillness. "He said he is busy," Asher said. His voice wasn't raised. It was low, smooth, and laced with a lethal threat that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Take your hand off him." Tyler scoffed, trying to mask his sudden intimidation with frat boy bravado. "Back off, man. We were just talking." "Right, Elliot." Asher didn't wait for my answer. He yanked Tyler's arm up and away with enough force to make the senior stumble out of his chair. "If I ever see you put your hands on him again, I won't just ask you to move. Do we have an understanding?" Tyler rubbed his wrist, his face flushed dark red with embarrassment and anger. He shot me a venomous look before turning on his heel and storming out of the shop. Asher didn't say a word to me. He just grabbed the strap of my backpack, hoisted it onto his shoulder, and commanded walk. The trek back to the dorm was suffocating. The silence radiating from Asher was heavy and volatile, like the air right before a massive thunderstorm. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The intense, violent surge of jealousy I had just witnessed from him was terrifying. Why did he care? Why was he acting like he owned me? As soon as we stepped inside room 412, the lock on the door clicked shut with a sharp, heavy sound. Blake was out for the night, leaving us entirely alone. I couldn't handle it anymore. The pressure in my chest was going to make me explode. I needed to end this. I needed to destroy the one thing that was tying my pathetic, twisted fantasies to this suffocating reality. I dropped to my knees beside my bed, frantically reaching under the mattress. My fingers found the familiar leather cover of the little black notebook. I pulled it out, my hands shaking violently. I needed to tear it to shreds. I needed to flush the pages down the toilet and pretend none of this ever happened. I grabbed a handful of the thick pages, bracing my hands to rip them apart. What do you think you are doing? A shadow fell over me. Before I could even tear the first page, Asher's hand shot out, his long fingers wrapping tightly around my wrists. His grip was entirely unyielding. He effortlessly pried the notebook from my trembling fingers, tossing it out of my reach onto his perfectly made bed. "Give it back," I yelled, the panic finally breaking through my voice. I scrambled up, lunging for the bed, but Asher stepped into my path. His broad chest collided with mine, the impact knocking the breath out of my lungs. "Are you destroying evidence?" Elliot Asher's voice was dangerously quiet. He backed me up step by slow step until my spine hit the cold, hard surface of the wooden closet door. He planted a hand on the wood right beside my head, trapping me completely. "It is mine. You have no right to look at it." I choked out, my eyes burning with angry, humiliated tears. "Just let me burn it, please." Asher didn't move. He reached behind him without taking his eyes off mine, his fingers closing over the notebook on the bed. He brought it up between us, flipping it open with one hand. "You want to burn it?" Asher murmured, his gaze dropping to the ink-stained pages. "Why? Because you are ashamed, or because you are terrified that I actually like what you wrote?" My breath hitched. "Stop." Asher ignored me. His eyes scanned the page, and then in that deep, resonant voice that haunted my every waking thought, he began to read aloud. I knew I was defective. Asher read, his voice curling around my pathetic, vulnerable words. But when his hands touched my waist, the fear vanished. I wanted him to ruin me. I wanted him to look at my broken body and tell me it belonged to him. He pinned me down, his breath ghosting over my collarbone, and I begged him not to stop. "Shut up," I screamed, a sob finally ripping from my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands flying up to cover my face. The absolute crushing humiliation of hearing my deepest, most agonizing secret read aloud in his voice was too much. It felt like he was flaying me alive. "I know I am disgusting. I know I am a freak. You don't have to mock me. Just stop. Don't look at me. Don't touch me." The room plunged into a deafening silence. The only sound was my ragged, pathetic sobbing as I slid down the wood of the door, completely broken. The notebook hit the floor with a heavy sound. Suddenly, warm, strong hands gripped my wrists, gently pulling my hands away from my tear-streaked face. Asher crouched down in front of me. His breathing was heavy, uneven. When I finally forced my red, swollen eyes open, I didn't see mockery or disgust. I saw a man entirely pushed to his absolute limit. "You think I am mocking you?" Asher's voice was a harsh, raw whisper. His dark eyes were burning with an intensity that made my heart stutter. He reached up, his large, warm palms cupping my face, his thumbs wiping away my tears with a fierce, desperate gentleness. "You wrote that, you begged me," Asher said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with raw, unfiltered desire. "You wrote that I was gentle. But that is logically flawed, Elliot." I stared at him, paralyzed, unable to process his words through the haze of my panic. "What?" Asher leaned in, his face mere inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. My physiological reaction when I saw that frat guy touch your waist today didn't run along the lines of being gentle. His gaze dropped to my trembling lips. "I didn't want to gently hold you. I wanted to break his arm, drag you back here, and lock the door so nobody could ever look at you again." My eyes widened. The air was suddenly entirely devoid of oxygen. You think your body is defective. Asher breathed, his fingers tangling into the hair at the nape of my neck, pulling me slightly forward. I think it is a masterpiece, and I am losing my damn mind trying not to touch you. Before I could even gasp, Asher eliminated the distance between us. His mouth crashed down onto mine. It wasn't a gentle experimental kiss. It was a violent, consuming collision of suppressed desire and heavy possessiveness. His lips parted mine with undeniable authority, taking everything I had to offer. A choked noise escaped my throat, and my hands, which had been frozen in fear moments ago, instinctively grabbed the lapels of his heavy coat, holding on as if he were the only thing keeping me tethered to the earth. The notebook lay forgotten on the floor, its fictions entirely eclipsed by the breathtaking, terrifying reality of his touch. The kiss broke, leaving the room entirely devoid of oxygen. I was gasping for air, my fingers still desperately clutching the heavy wool of Asher's coat. My heart was slamming against my ribs with such violent force I thought it might shatter them. Asher's forehead rested against mine, his chest heaving, his dark eyes dilated and burning with a raw, consuming fire I had never seen before. For one fleeting, gravity-defying second, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. But then, the crushing weight of reality crashed down on me like an avalanche. My brain short-circuited. This isn't real. The voice in my head was a screaming, panicked siren. He is just reacting to the notebook. He is curious. It is an adrenaline rush. Once the novelty wears off, once he actually has to touch the scars, the blood, the wrongness of my body, the disgust will come back. I couldn't survive that. If I let myself believe this was real and he looked at me with pity or revulsion tomorrow, it would permanently destroy whatever fragile pieces of my soul I had left. No, I choked out my voice, cracking into a pathetic whimper. I shoved my hands against his chest, pushing him away with a sudden frantic burst of adrenaline. Asher stumbled back a half step, completely blindsided by my resistance. Elliot, don't. I scrambled away from the closet door, putting the width of the room between us. My entire body was trembling violently. You are just confused. You read that stupid, pathetic notebook, and you think it is some twisted psychological game. It is pity, or morbid curiosity. But I am not an experiment, Asher. Are you out of your mind? Asher's voice cracked like a whip, his jaw clenching tight. He took a step forward. You think this is a game to me? Don't come near me. I grabbed my backpack from the floor, blindly shoving my phone and wallet inside. The cramps in my abdomen flared up, a sharp, stabbing reminder of the deformed biology that made me completely unworthy of a normal relationship. I can't do this. I can't be your charity case. Before he could say another word, I yanked the door open and sprinted out into the dimly lit hallway. I didn't look back. I flew down the stairs, bursting through the heavy double doors of the dorm building and out into the freezing November night. I didn't stop running until the burning in my lungs completely overpowered the aching in my chest. I found myself shivering under the glaring neon lights of the Marriott Hotel just 3 blocks away from the Eastwood campus. It was a pathetic, desperate escape plan. I used the emergency money I had saved from my summer tutoring job to book a standard room on the 4th floor. The hotel room was impeccably clean, sterile, and entirely suffocating. I locked the door, threw the deadbolt, and collapsed onto the edge of the perfectly made, king-sized bed. The silence was deafening. I pulled my knees to my chest, burying my face in my arms, and finally let the tears fall. I cried until my throat was raw, mourning the beautiful, impossible illusion that I had just forcefully shattered. It was almost midnight when the sharp, electronic tone of the door lock echoed through the quiet room. My head snapped up. The heavy wooden door clicked the deadbolt smoothly, disengaging from the outside. I scrambled backward on the bed, my heart leaping into my throat. The door swung open and the hallway light spilled into the dark room. Asher stepped inside. He closed the door behind him with a soft, definitive sound. He looked completely exhausted. His hair was slightly disheveled from the wind, and his heavy coat was unbuttoned. In one hand, he held a sleek, black plastic keycard. In the other, he carried a small pharmacy bag. How I whispered, my voice completely hoarse. "How did you get in here?" Asher didn't answer immediately. He walked over to the small, round table near the window and set the pharmacy bag down. He pulled out a box of the exact brand of pain relievers I used, a heating pad, and a familiar pack of sanitary products. "Did you honestly forget?" Asher asked, his voice a low, heavy rumble in the quiet room. He tossed the master key card onto the table. My family's holding company owns this property, Elliot. The manager downstairs practically handed me the master key before I even asked. You are terrible at running away. I shrank back against the headboard, pulling the duvet over my legs. Leave me alone, Asher, please. Asher ignored my plea. He walked to the edge of the bed and sat down. The mattress dipped under his weight. He didn't try to touch me, but his presence was entirely overwhelming. He rested his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands together, and stared at the floor for a long, agonizing moment. You think I kissed you out of pity, Asher finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was stripped of all its usual icy arrogance. It sounded incredibly raw. You think I am playing a game, but you have absolutely no idea what it has been like to live in the same room as you for the past year and a half. And I stopped breathing. I stared at his broad shoulders, completely paralyzed. Asher slowly lifted his head. His dark eyes locked onto mine, stripping away every single defense I had left. When I first met you, you were so incredibly guarded, Asher murmured, his gaze tracing the outline of my face. You glared at me like I was the enemy. But then I noticed the little things. The way you bit your lip when you studied. The way you smelled like vanilla and worn-out paper. I realized terrifyingly fast that I didn't just want to be your roommate. I wanted everything. I wanted to monopolize your time. I wanted to be the only person you looked at. He took a slow, deep breath, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his own hands. I thought I was sick, Elliot, Asher confessed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. My possessiveness over you, it was violent. It was consuming. I kept my distance because I knew if I let myself get close, I would completely overwhelm you. I thought I was a monster who would only terrify you. A single tear slipped down my cheek, hot and fast. Asher reached out his warm, rough thumb, gently catching the tear before it hit my jaw. This time, I didn't flinch. And then Asher breathed, leaning in closer, the scent of cedar and cold night air wrapping around me. I read your notebook. My breath hitched violently. I read those pages, and I realized you didn't want a gentleman, Asher said, his eyes darkening with a heavy, predatory heat. You wanted the exact monster I was trying so desperately to hide from you. You wrote about me taking control. You wrote about me claiming every single broken, beautiful part of you. He shifted his weight, his knee pressing gently against my thigh through the duvet. I am not curious, Elliot. And I do not feel pity, Asher stated, his tone carrying an absolute, undeniable finality. I am deeply, irreversibly obsessed with you. And now that I know you want me to, I am never ever going to let you hide from me again. He raised his other hand, gently cupping both sides of my face. He didn't force a kiss. He just held me there, letting the absolute truth of his words sink into my skin. So Asher whispered, his lips hovering mere inches from mine. I'm stepping over the line right now. If you truly want me to leave, look me in the eyes and tell me to walk out that door. I will go, and I will never touch you again. The silence in the hotel room was deafening. The invisible wall I had spent years building around my defective body was crumbling to dust. He knew my darkest secrets. He knew the twisted reality of my biology, and he was still here, begging me to let him stay. I looked into his dark, burning eyes, completely terrified, but for the first time in my life, entirely ready to surrender. I didn't tell him to leave. Instead, my trembling fingers reached up, loosely grasping the thick wool of his coat lapels. It was the smallest, most hesitant gesture of surrender, but to Asher, it was a starting gun. With a low, ragged intake of breath, he closed the agonizing distance between us. His mouth captured mine no longer with the violent, punishing desperation of the dorm room, but with a deep, consuming reverence that completely shattered my remaining defenses. His large hands slid from my cheeks down to my waist, lifting me effortlessly. My legs instinctively wrapped around his hips, and before I could process the sudden shift in gravity, my back hit the soft mattress of the king-sized bed. Asher followed me down his heavy body, pressing me into the duvet. The kiss deepened, tasting of mint cold night air and an overwhelming, intoxicating heat. My hands frantically navigated the buttons of his coat, pushing the heavy fabric off his shoulders until it fell to the floor in a heap. When his cool fingers brushed against the hem of my oversized hoodie, a sudden violent jolt of panic seized my chest. No, wait. The intoxicating haze of the kiss instantly evaporated, replaced by the cold, crushing reality of my physical form. I wasn't the idealized, flawless protagonist I wrote about in my stories. I was deeply, irreversibly flawed. There were surgical scars on my lower abdomen, The curves of my waist were too soft, entirely wrong for a guy, and the raw, bruised skin on my thighs from scrubbing away the blood was still there. As Asher pulled the hoodie over my head, the harsh, unforgiving hotel lights flooded my exposed skin. "Don't," I gasped, my voice cracking. I violently twisted away, curling my knees to my chest and crossing my arms tightly over my stomach. "Turn off the lights." "Please, Asher, turn them off." "Don't look at it." Tears hot with shame pricked the corners of my eyes. The old familiar terror was suffocating me. This was the moment. This was the moment the adrenaline would fade, the reality of my deformed biology would set in, and the disgust would finally surface in his eyes. The bed shifted. Asher didn't reach for the bedside lamp. He didn't pull away either. He moved over me gently but firmly, prying my tense arms away from my chest. He pinned my wrists to the mattress, just like he had in my fantasies, but there was no aggression in his grip, only an unshakable grounding strength. "Open your eyes, Elliot," he commanded softly. I squeezed them shut tighter, shaking my head frantically. "It is ugly. It is wrong. I am a freak. Stop." Asher's voice was sharp, cutting through my panic like a blade. I felt the mattress dip, and then a feather-light sensation bloomed across my stomach. I gasped. Asher was tracing the jagged line of my oldest scar. His touch wasn't clinical or curious. It was a worshipful, devastatingly tender caress. He leaned down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss right over the scar tissue. My eyes flew open in pure shock. Asher looked up at me, his dark eyes entirely devoid of pity or disgust. They were shining with a heavy, unadulterated adoration. "You wrote it yourself," Asher whispered, his breath ghosting over my sensitive skin. Page 42. He traced the broken lines of my body like they were a map to something sacred. He looked at my deepest insecurities and promised to love every single one of them. A fresh sob ripped from my throat, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was a profound, overwhelming relief. "Did you think I was just reading a story?" Asher asked, his thumb gently smoothing over the curve of my hip. "I was memorizing the instruction manual to you, Elliot. Do you really not believe your own words?" I stared at him, my heart swelling until it felt like it might burst. I slowly relaxed, unfurling my tense muscles, laying completely bare and vulnerable under the harsh lights. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel the desperate urge to hide. Asher smiled, a small, genuinely breathtaking curve of his lips that made my stomach flip. He let go of my wrists and sat back on his heels. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I blinked, confused by the sudden change in pace. "What are you doing?" Clearing the air entirely, Asher said. He unlocked the screen, tapped on an app, and handed the phone to me. "Look." I took the phone with trembling fingers. It was the web browser. The screen displayed a very familiar interface, the underground fiction archive, where I had been anonymously serializing my stories for the past year. But this wasn't the public view. It was a user dashboard. The username at the top read Eastwood99. Beside it was a glowing badge, Tier 1 VIP sponsor. My jaw dropped. I knew that user. That user had been the very first person to leave a comment on my fic 6 months ago. That user donated the maximum amount of money every single time I posted a chapter. I scrolled down to the comment history, my eyes widening to the size of saucers. Eastwood 99 5 months ago. The sexual tension in the library scene was exquisite, but his posture is too defensive. The dominant character needs to push him harder. Eastwood 99 2 months ago. You describe his scent as vanilla. I can confirm this is highly accurate and incredibly distracting. Eastwood 99 1 week ago. Author, respectfully, when are you going to let the main characters stop dancing around each other and just fuck? I am losing my patience. I dropped the phone onto the mattress like it burned me. My face instantly erupted in a blazing inferno of heat. "You," I choked out, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You were Eastwood 99. You have been reading my serializations for 6 months and paying me for them." Asher let out a low, rich laugh that vibrated straight through my chest. He tossed the phone onto the nightstand and leaned over me, trapping me beneath his shadow once again. "I told you," Asher murmured, his eyes dancing with dark amusement and heavy desire. "I knew everything. I have known how your mind works, what you crave, and exactly how you want me to touch you. The only thing I didn't know was how much longer I could survive, waiting for you to realize I wasn't a fiction." The last remnants of my insecurity shattered into a million pieces, swept away by the sheer overwhelming magnitude of his obsession. I wasn't a freak. I wasn't alone. He had been holding my hand in the dark this entire time. "Then stop waiting," I breathed, wrapping my arms around his neck and pulling him down. When we finally collided, there was no more hesitation, no more acting, no more hiding behind fierce academic rivalries or locked bathroom doors. Asher worshipped every inch of my body, kissing away years of trauma and self-hatred, replacing it with a burning, undeniable ownership. He was exactly the dominant, meticulous lover I had written him to be, reading my body's reactions, flawlessly pushing me to the absolute edge until I was sobbing his name entirely undone and perfectly whole. When I finally drifted off to sleep hours later, the harsh hotel lights were still on. I was tangled in the sheets, my head resting over the steady, rhythmic beating of Asher's heart. I didn't care about the lights anymore, because for the first time, the reality I was living in was infinitely better than anything I could ever write. The Eastwood University campus was covered in a thin, glittering layer of early December frost by the time we finally left the suffocatingly beautiful bubble of the Marriott Hotel. The biting winter wind whipped across the quad, stripping the last of the dead leaves from the oak trees. But for the first time since I stepped foot on this campus, I didn't feel the cold. I was walking back to the dorms, entirely swallowed up in Asher's oversized black wool coat. My own clothes had been practically ruined, and Asher had flat out refused to let me step outside in a thin hoodie. The heavy fabric smelled intensely of cedarwood, and him acting like a physical shield against the rest of the world. My body ached a deep, lingering soreness that had absolutely nothing to do with my biology, and everything to do with the fact that Asher had spent the last 24 hours thoroughly proving that every single word I had written in my notebook was true. When we pushed open the heavy wooden door to room 412, the chaotic, overwhelming scent of stale beer and cheap sunscreen hit us like a brick wall. Blake was back. He was sprawled face down on his unmade bed, an open suitcase, vomiting neon swim trunks and wrinkled t-shirts onto the floor. At the sound of the door clicking shut, he groaned, rolling over and aggressively rubbing his bloodshot eyes. His skin was peeling from a terrible Florida sunburn. Keep the noise down." Blake mumbled, his voice raspy from what I could only assume was a 3-day frat bender. He squinted at us through the dim morning light filtering through the blinds. "When did you guys get back? I thought you were both off playing house with your respective girls." I froze. The panic that usually accompanied Blake's questions instinctively flared in my chest, but before I could scramble for a pathetic lie, a large, warm hand settled firmly on the small of my back. Asher stepped further into the room, his thumb gently drawing a soothing circle against my spine through the heavy coat. "We just got in," Asher said. His voice was completely smooth, carrying that signature icy calm that he used to intimidate professors and frat boys alike. He walked past Blake's bed, effortlessly steering me toward my side of the room. Blake sat up, wincing as his sunburn stretched. "So, Elliot, how was the mysterious New York girlfriend? Did you actually survive a whole weekend with her, or did she realize you are a neurotic neat freak and ditch you?" My face instantly flooded with a blazing, uncontrollable heat. I kept my eyes firmly glued to the floor, terrified that if I looked at Blake, he would see the visible, unmistakable marks Asher had left completely painting my collarbones. "She didn't ditch him," Asher answered for me, his tone dropping into a low, terrifyingly amused drawl. He unbuttoned his coat, the one I was currently drowning in, and helped me slide it off my shoulders. "She is actually incredibly clingy. She cried a little at first, but she is perfectly happy now. We spent the entire weekend in bed." I choked on my own saliva, my eyes widening in pure horror. I shot Asher a desperate, wide-eyed glare, silently begging him to shut up. He just looked down at me, his dark eyes dancing with absolute, unapologetic arrogance. Blake snorted, completely oblivious to the heavy, suffocating sexual tension suddenly filling the room. "Damn okay, TMI. What about you, Asher? Your girl still as perfect as you said." Asher didn't look at Blake. His gaze was locked entirely on me, tracing the slight nervous tremble of my lower lip. "More perfect than I could have ever imagined," he murmured, his voice softening into a raw, heavy sincerity that made my knees feel dangerously weak. "I don't plan on ever letting her out of my sight again." Blake threw a pillow over his face, groaning loudly. "You guys are sickening. I'm going back to sleep. Wake me up when finals week is over." Finals week arrived 3 days later, bringing a tidal wave of panic to the entire campus. The library was packed to the brim, forcing the three of us to hunker down in room 412. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the frantic scribbling of highlighters. I was sitting cross-legged on my bed, a constitutional law textbook balanced on my lap. The dull, familiar ache of my cycle had completely faded, leaving behind a strange, terrifyingly peaceful quiet in my mind. I didn't have to hide my pain anymore. Yesterday, Asher had casually walked into the campus pharmacy, bought a box of sanitary pads and pain relievers without batting an eye, and tossed them onto my desk in broad daylight. Blake had asked about it, and Asher had simply stared him down until Blake awkwardly apologized and left the room. "Elliot, I am literally going to fail this class," Blake whined from his desk, aggressively running his hands through his messy hair. "The professor talks too fast. I don't have the notes for the 14th Amendment. Can I borrow your notebook?" Before I could even process his request, Blake pushed his chair back and reached across the narrow gap between our desks. His hand clamped down on the small, black leather notebook resting near my laptop. My heart completely stopped. It was the notebook. In a fraction of a second before Blake could even lift the leather cover, a large pale hand shot out and clamped down over Blake's wrist. Asher had crossed the room silently. His grip was completely unforgiving. He effortlessly pried Blake's fingers off the black cover, sliding the notebook across the desk and safely into his own pocket. Then, entirely ignoring Blake's bewildered expression, Asher stepped behind my chair. He wrapped his arms loosely around my waist from behind, resting his chin casually on the top of my head. "What the hell, man?" Blake stammered, rubbing his wrist. "I just wanted to borrow his notes." "This notebook doesn't have lecture notes," Asher said, his voice cold, commanding, and entirely uncompromising. "It is my personal property now. It contains highly classified, deeply sensitive material, and if I ever see you try to touch it again, I will personally ensure you get expelled. Use the textbook, Blake." Blake stared at us, his eyes darting from Asher's protective hold around my waist to my intensely flushed face. His brain practically short-circuited trying to process the visual. "Dude, you guys are acting really weird lately." Study Asher commanded, simply tightening his grip on my waist just a fraction, sending a thrilling electric jolt straight down my spine. That night, when the dorm finally went completely dark and Blake's heavy snoring signaled that he was dead to the world, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The heavy burden of my intersex identity, the crushing self-hatred, the endless exhausting charade, it was all completely gone. The springs of my narrow twin bed creaked softly. The blanket was lifted and a large, incredibly warm body slid into the cramped space beside me. Asher wrapped a heavy arm around my waist, pulling my back flush against his broad chest. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. "You smell like vanilla and stress," he whispered, his breath ghosting over my skin. "Your bed is literally 3 feet away," I whispered back, a soft, involuntary smile breaking across my face. "And it is a lot bigger." "I don't care," Asher murmured, pressing a soft kiss to the scarred skin just above my hip bone. "I'm sleeping here." I shifted slightly, turning to face him in the dark. In the dim orange glow filtering through the window, I saw him reach into his sweatpants pocket. He pulled out the little black notebook and a silver pen. I watched in silent, breathless awe as he flipped past the pages of my desperate, self-indulgent fantasies, past the red-inked corrections he had made, all the way to the very last page I had written. With a soft metallic sound, he uncapped the pen. Using his chest as a desk, he wrote a single steady line of text beneath my messy handwriting. He capped the pen, set the notebook on the floor, and pulled me entirely into his arms, burying my face against his collarbone. "Go to sleep, Elliot," he whispered, his voice vibrating with absolute unconditional love. "You never have to hide again." When my breathing finally evened out and the exhaustion pulled me under, I felt completely, undeniably safe. It wasn't until the next morning, when Asher was in the shower and the room was empty, that I picked the notebook up off the floor and read the final line written in his sharp, elegant cursive. "From today on, there is no need to write fictional stories. We will practice it every single day for the rest of our lives."